Today's daf is Menachos daf Samach Aleph, and we will begin from the Mishnah on the top of daf Samach Aleph Amid Aleph. So the Mishnah on daf Samach mentioned Yesh Tu'unois Hagasha ve'en Tu'unois Tenufa. There are certain karbanos that have a mitzvah of Hagasha but don't have a mitzvah of Tenufa. Hagasha ve'Tenufa. There are karbanos that have a mitzvah of Hagasha and a mitzvah of Tenufa. Tenufa v'loy Hagasha. Some karbanos have a mitzvah of Tenufa but don't have a mitzvah of Hagasha. And then finally, there's a fourth category, loy Tenufa v'loy Hagasha. There are karbanos that don't have a mitzvah of Tenufa and don't have a mitzvah of Hagasha. And then the Mishnah went on to describe the category of karbanos that have a mitzvah of Hagasha but do not have a mitzvah of Tenufa. So the Mishnah Daf Samach Aleph picks up on that note and is now going to discuss the other three categories. The Mishnah, Elu Tunois Tenufa, ve'en Tunois Hagasha. The following karbanos have a mitzvah of Tenufa, but do not have a mitzvah of Hagasha. Loik Shemen Shal Mitzayra v'Asham. The carbon Asham that the Mitzayra used to bring b'yom Taharasai, and the loik shemen that was unique to the carbon that the Mitzayra used to bring. Both of those have a mitzvah of tenufa, but there's no mitzvah of hagasha. So there was a mitzvah of tenufa for the kohen to do with the asham that the Mitzayra brought, together with the like shemen. The Gemara will talk a little bit more about this. According to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, there was a mitzvah of tenufa with bikurim. So every time a yid would come to the Beis Hamikdash, he would bring his bikurim to the kohen. There was a mitzvah of tenufa, no hagasha, but tenufa. The emurei shalmei yachid, the chazav the sheik shalahem. The emurim of a shalmei yachid. So anytime a yachid brought a carbon shlamim, the emurim would go on the mizbeach. So the chelik of the shlamim that went on the mizbeach, before it went on the mizbeach, had a mitzvah of tenufa. Additionally, the chaza and the shaik. The chaza is the breast of the shlamim. The shaik is the thigh of the shlamim. They did not go on the mizbeach. Rather, they were part of the matnas kahuna. They were given to the kohanim, but they were included in the mitzvah of tenufa. So the tenufa of the shalmei yachid included both the chalavin, the chelik that went legavaya, that went to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the chazav shaik. That's what went to the kohanim. Echad anoshim, the echad nashim. The mitzvah of tenufa applies both with men and with women. Be Yisrael, stating that it's Be Yisrael v'loy b'achem. The Gemara will explain that line. Shnei halechem, v'shtei kivsei hatzeres. The shtei halechem and the shtei kivsei hatzeres also had a mitzvah of tenufa. Case of the way, so how was the mitzvah of tenufa done with the shnei halechem and the shtei kivsei hatzeres? Loisim shtei halechem al gabi shnei kvasim. He would put the shtei halechem on top of the two kvasim. That was the shalmei tzibur. Umeniach shtei yadav lamata. He would put his two hands on top of that. So his hands, on top of his hands are the kivsei hatzeres. On top of the kivsei hatzeres are the shtei halechem, and then he would start to shakel. Moilechu mevi, mailu moirid. More about this in tomorrow's daf. Similar to the way you shakel a lulav. The Gemara will say that shenemar ashahuna v'ashahuram. Tenufa was done by the mizbeach, but it was done on the mizrach side of the mizbeach. The hagasha b'mayriv. The mitzvah of hagasha was done on the mayriv side of the mizbeach. Tenufa is kodmes lahagashas. Additionally, if you have a carbon that has a mitzvah of tenufa and hagasha, so which one comes first? Tenufa comes before hagasha. Next, minchas ha'omer, minchas kanois, te'unois hagasha v'tenufa. So the previous Mishnah discussed karbanos that have a mitzvah of hagasha but no mitzvah of tenufa. We just discussed the list of those that have tenufa and no hagasha. What about the ones that have both tenufa and hagasha? It's a very short list. The minchas ha'omer and the minchas kanois. Those two menachos, which are unique in so many different ways. They're unique, there was no shemen. They're unique, there was no levaina. Thus, their kmitza ended up being very unique. Another unique quality of the minchas Chayte and the Minchas Kanois was that they had a mitzvah of Tenufa and they had a mitzvah of Hagasha. Lechem aponim or Minchas Nesachim ein Teunois loy Hagasha v'loy Tenufa. Shimon says Gimel minim Teun and Gimel mitzvahs. Shtayim b'chol achas v'achas v'shlishas ein b'hem. So Shimon said that there are three karbanos that need two of three of the following mitzvahs. So Reb Shimon said you could line up three karbanos on one side, three mitzvahs on the other side, and I can tell you that all three of these karbanos that you lined up are going to need two of the three mitzvahs that you lined up, but none of them are going to have all three. All three are going to have two of the three. Okay, ve'eluhein zivchei shalmei tzibur. That's one of the three karbanos that we're lining up. Zivchei shalmei yachid and the Asha Mitzayra. And Reb Shimon explains, Zivchi Shalmi Yachid needs two of the three. Which three? Tu'unan Smicha Michayim, and had a mitzvah of Smicha while the animal was alive. The Tenufa Shchutim, and there was mitzvah of Tenufa that was meant to be done after the Shchita already took place. Ve'im Behem Tenufa Chayim. Which one of the three mitzvahs does it not have? There was no mitzvahs Tenufa Michayim. So in other words, the three karbanos that were lining up are the Shalmei Yachid, that's any shlomim that a Yachid's bringing. The Shalmei Tzibur, that's only the Shnei Kifsei Atzeres, the two kvasim that were brought together with the Shtei Alechem on Shavuos, and the Asha Mitzvah. Those are the three karbanos. What are the three mitzvahs? Smicha, Tenufa Michayim, and Tenufa La'acha Shchita, Tenufa La'acha Misa. So the first one, which is the Shalmei Yachid, needed two of the three. Which two did it need? Smicha and Tenufa Shchutim. Which one does it not have? There's no Tenufa Michayim. Zivchi Shalmei Tzibur, Tenufa Chayim, the Shchutim. It has the both Tenufas. It has the Tenufa while the animal's alive, Tenufa when the animal's not alive anymore, then Smicha. However, there's no Smicha. The Asha Mitzayra needs Smicha, the Tenufa Chai, the Ein by Tenufa Shachat. The Gemara is going to talk about this more in tomorrow's daf. One thing you see clearly, Reb Shimon holds that there was a difference between the mitzvah of Tenufa of a Shalmei Yachid and the mitzvah's Tenufa of a Shalmei Tzibur. Again, much greater detail in tomorrow's daf. Zok the Gemara Tan Rabbana, the Hikra V'Yisay LaAsham, the Esloik Hashamim, the Heinef. So the Mishnah had mentioned Elu Tu'unois Tenufa ve'en Tu'unois Hagash, and the first thing the Mishnah said was like Shemen Shom Mitzayra ve'Ashamai. So the carbon Asham that the Mitzayra would bring and his like Shemen both require Tenufa. Now how do you know that? So the Gemara immediately brings a pasuk. It's a pasuk in the Torah. The pasuk says very clearly V'lakach HaKoyin es HaKeves HaEchad ve'hikra v'Yisay LaAsham. So we're talking about the Asham of the Mitzayra. Ve'es like Hashamen, that's the like Shemen Shom Mitzayra ve'heinef Oisam Tenufa lifnei Hashem. So it's very clear the fact that the Asham and the like Shemen of the Mitzvah requires Tenufa is all you have to do is be Mavasetra. It's a pasuk in the Torah stating that the words Veheinef Oisam Tenufa Lifnei Hashem is the subject of this brisa, and the Gemara is going to be medayik every word in this brisa. It says the Gemara from the words Veheinef Oisam Tenufa Melamed Sheunam Tenufa Ke'echad. We learned that you're supposed to do the Tenufa together, meaning you don't do an independent Tenufa for the Asham and then an independent Tenufa for the like Shemen, but you do it together. Where do you see that? Veheinef Oisam together. That's the way you're supposed to do the tenufa. How do you know that b'di'evet if you do them individually it's okay? Because the pasuk says v'hikriv oisoi la'asham ve'es loik hashamim, and then it says v'heinef. So as much as it says v'heinef oisam, but if you would stop after the word v'heinef, heinef is a lashon yachid, and it would sound like it's going back on the last thing you said, ve'es loik hashamim. Or on the previous thing you said, the Asha. So on the one hand, it says Oisam, which is mashma together, but then again it says Veheinif. It doesn't say Veheinifam, it says Veheinif. Thus, it suggests that you can even do one. How do you reconcile that? Likatchila, it's Oisam, but if you did them individually, it's going to be also. Okay, says the Gemara, how do you know? Maybe the way you reconcile Veheinif, which suggests one at a time, and Oisam, which suggests both, is by doing two tenufas. Maybe do a tenufa together, then do a tenufa individually. Like this, you'll be yoitza oisam, and you'll be yoitza v'heinif talmud b'imir tenufa. Because then the Torah says again, v'heinif oisam tenufa. Tenufa is a lashon yachid. It's mashma one tenufa. The loy tenufa is not multiple tenufas. L'fnei Hashem. What does l'fnei Hashem mean? B'mizrach. It means that it's supposed to be b'mizrach, on the mizrach side of the mizbeach. And it's for that reason the Mishnah said that the tenufa oisa b'mizrach. It's based on this brisa, this pasuk. Lefnei Hashem means mizrach. Ikti Gemara. Lefnei Hashem means mizrach. For Amrit, we know throughout Zvachim Lefnei Hashem is Yochel b'Mayriv. It always means Mayriv. Says the Gemara. Amri hani milu mincha deikra chatas. That context where it says Lefnei Hashem b'Mayriv was talking about a carbon mincha. A carbon mincha is called chatas. Torah refers to the carbon mincha as a chatas. The minchas chayte, the mincha that was brought in the context of the carbon oil of Yair, the Torah says was brought like a chatas. Thus, you see it as a din of a chatas. V'chatas tunu yisoid. The chatas needed a yisoid. The zrik of a chatas needed yisoid. V'keren d'roimus mizrachas lo hayolo yisoid. And the d'roimus mizrachas part of mizbech didn't have a yisoid. Thus, when you're talking about a mincha, it has to be referring to Ma'ariv, because only the Ma'ariv part of the mizbeach that's Lifnei Hashem had a Yesod. But the Mizrach part of the Mizbeach that's Lifnei Hashem didn't have a Yesod. Aval Hacha, but over here where it doesn't say anything about a Chatas, we're talking about the Asha Mitzayra, which is an Asham, it's not a Chatas. We're talking about the Loik Shemen Shal Mitzayra, which is not like a Chatas. All it needs is to be Lifnei Hashem. And Lifnei Hashem can be satisfied by putting it on the Mizrach side of the Mizbeach, not only by putting it on the Ma'ariv side of the Mizbeach. So what do we mean? We're going according to the Manama that holds. We know there's Machlokes and Shas where exactly the Mizbeach was within the Azara. So one Manama says it was smack in the middle. It was Mechza B'tzaf and Mechza B'darim, which means that if you walked out of the Heichal, you would hit the Ma'ariv side of the Mizbeach. So Ma'ariv was the real part of the Mizbeach, that was the Lifnei Hashem. But there's also a Mandama that says that the entire Mizbeach was B'tzafen, which means that if you walked out of the Mizbeach, you walked out of the Heichal and you came to the Mizbeach, so you would hit the Ma'ariv wall of the Mizbeach, but at the same time, the Mizrachis, the roimis of the Mizbeach, if you have a picture, it's much easier to visualize this, was also considered Lifnei Hashem. Because you walk out of the Mizbeach, you just face a little bit to the left, so you see the whole Darim side of the Mizbeach, and you have Maravis, the roimis, going to Mizrachis, the roimis. So for that reason, there's a Mizrach part of the Mizbeach that could also be deemed Lifnei Hashem. It's Mizrachis the roimis, not the Mizrach wall. The Mizrach wall is on the other side of the Mizbeach. That's not called Lifnei Hashem. It's the place where Mizrach and Darim hits, because being that the entire Darim is Lifnei Hashem, so Mizrachis Deroimis is also considered Lifnei Hashem. So when our Sugya says that Mizrach could be considered Lifnei Hashem, thus the Mishnah that says the Trufa of the Asha Mitzayra and the Loik Shemen Shal Mitzayra is considered Lifnei Hashem, it's based on the Mizrach part of the Mizbeach that's Lifnei Hashem, specifically Mizrachis Deroimis. Now Mizrachis Deroimis didn't have a Yesod. Mizrachis Deremis was the only corner of the Mizbeach that didn't have a Yesod. This is Vacham 101. There was no Yesod there. Thus, where there's a halacha of Lifnei Hashem, and you have to have Yesod, such as by a Mincha, because the Torah called Mincha Chatas, and just like Chatas needs Yesod, Mincha needs Yesod, so it's automatically going to exclude any part of Mizrach of being Lifnei Hashem. It's not possible to get, because the only part of Mizrach that could be Lifnei Hashem is the corner of Mizrachis Deremis. Mizrachis Deremis had no Yesod. So being that had no Yesod, by definition, if you're talking about Lifnei Hashem in the context of a Mincha, which is like a Chatas, you're down to Ma'ariv. That's the only place that's going to work. But being that by the Mitzayr doesn't say anything about Chatas, thus you don't have a din of Yesod. You don't have a din Yesod. If the Mizbeach wasn't softened, then Mizrachis Deroimis is considered Lifnei Hashem. Thus the Mishnah says Lifnei Hashem Mizrach. Now, by the way, Rashi says it doesn't have to be Mizrach. If you wanted to do it by Ma'ariv, you could do it by Ma'ariv also, because our sugya is not coming out that only Mizrachis Deroimis is Lifnei Hashem. Thus, that's the only place the Torah was referring to when it said the Heina Faisam Tufa Lifnei Hashem. Rashi's lashon is you could also do it. Kolomer afilu b'Mizrach Karina Bei Lifnei Hashem. In contrast to most sugyas where Lifnei Hashem is going to be Ma'ariv, over here Lifnei Hashem could mean Mizrach. Either way, V'habikurim, the Mishnah said, Kedivra Blessed Ben Yaakov, that Bikurim also has a mitzvah of Tenufa, but only according to one shita. According to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, so you don't always find the lashon of Mishnah like that. Usually the Mishnah says the halacha divrei Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, loit Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov shita, says the Mishnah that holds that Bikurim has a mitzvah of tenufa, so you can add Bikurim to the list of those that have tenufa but don't have agasha, because there's no agasha by Bikurim. So, my Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Who's this Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov? The Tanya, it's a Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov in a brisa. So, the Gemara, the lokach hakoyen. It says in the Torah, the lokach hakoyen hatenem yadecha v'hinicha lifnei mizbach Hashem Elokecha. Says Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. The word v'lokach means not just that the kohen should take hatenem yadecha, but he should do a mitzvah with it. Limit ala bikurim shetun and trufa divrei Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. My time Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Goma yad yad mishlam. Ksivach. It says over here v'lokach hakoyen hatenem yadecha. It says the word miyadecha. V'ksiv hasam, and it says regarding the shlamim yadav tiviena, and there yadav means it's trufa. So we learn ma kan koyen aflahalon koyen. Just like number one, that miyadecha means trufa. Just like it means trufa by shlamim, it means trufa over here. Additionally, just like over here, who's the one that's taking it? The velokach hakoyen. It's talking about a koyen. So we could actually learn a halacha regarding the mitzvah of tenufa by a shlamim from the mitzvah of tenufa from Bikurim. So again, the fact that there's a mitzvah of tenufa by Bikurim, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov learns yad mishlamim. It says v'lokach hakoyin hatenem yadecha yadav tiviyan. Now Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov continues and he says, once I know the mitzvah of tenufa by Bikurim, how do I know it? I know it from shlamim. So now I can learn something about tenufa shlamim from Bikurim. And what is that? Who does the tenufa? Meaning, I don't know. It's a good question. Is tenufa an avodah? It has to be done by a kohen. Maybe the bailim does it. Maybe anybody could do it. Says Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, I learned learn it from this pasuk. By Bikurim it says clearly that who's doing the tenufa of the kohen. So aflahalan kohen, so too by a shlamim. All other areas of tenufa it's going to be done by a shlamim. And by the way, umalahalan bayim. If you look at that pasuk that talks about the mitzvah of tenufa by a shlamim, it actually says mufurish the bayim is the one that did it. Afkan bayim. So by Bikurim the bayim has to do it also. So what's going on? Do we learn from Bikurim that the kohen v'lokach kohen atenem yadecha, or do we learn from shlamim that the bayim does the tenufa? What happens is the kohen would put his hand underneath the hand of the bayim, and together they would do tenufa. Again, a lot more about tenufa logistically in tomorrow's daf. So the Mishnah said that according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, there was a mitzvah of tenufa by Bikurim. Is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov the only shita in Shas that holds there was tenufa by Bikurim? The time we learned to the Brayso, it says in the pasuk, "Va'ata hine hivesias reishes priyo adam, asher nasata li Hashem, v'hinachtoi lifnei Hashem alikecha, v'shtachavisa lifnei Hashem alikecha." These are all psukim and parshas Kisavai that talk about that. It's the parsha of Mikra Bikurim. But either way, Rabbi Yehuda says, "V'hinachtem means tenufa. Ata omer zu tenufa yini ela hanocha. Kishu omer v'hinichoi harei hanocha. Mani mekayim v'hinachtoi zu tenufa." Al kol panim, it's a shittas Rabbi Yehuda as well. Rabbi Yehuda, just like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, holds that Bikurim has a mitzvah of tenufa. So why did the Mishnah say Bikurim needs tenufa kid divrei Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov? As if to say it's only Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. It's not only Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. I found Rabbi Yehuda as well. Why is the Mishnah mentioning Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and not Rabbi Yehuda? And the Gemara says two terusim. Omar Rava, the first teretz is Hoyel upasach bayakos of tchila, because the makar to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is from a word that comes earlier than Rabbi Yehuda's word. That's Dvarim Chavav pasuk Dalet. The pasuk v'hinachtoi that seems to be the makar of Rabbi Yehuda is Dvarim Chavav pasuk Yud. So being that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov's pasuk is 6 psukim earlier than Rabbi Yehuda's pasuk, see, he learns it from an earlier word, from an earlier pasuk. Thus, it's his halacha that was mentioned. An interesting teretz. Rav Nachman by Yitzchak Amar, an even more interesting teretz, and that will be the topic of today's read. Hoyel v'Rav Gavre. Rashi. What does that mean? Shu chacham b'yoser. You know why we're mentioning Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov? Because Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov was a wiser man than Rabbi Yehuda. He was a chacham b'yoser. He was a bigger chacham. How do I know that? The Kaimamon. Zok Rashi, it's a Gemara. Mishnas Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov kavanaki. Everybody knows that Mishnas Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is kavanaki. What does that mean? Kav. There isn't a lot of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov in Shas, but naki. Everything Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said is pristine. Thus, being that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov was a greater chacham, being that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov was a greater chacham than Rabbi Yehuda, so we can quote either Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov or we can quote Rabbi Yehuda. We'd rather quote Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. We'll get to the rate a little bit later. Mishnah said that another thing that has a mitzvah of tenufa, v'lo hagasha, are the emurim of the Shalmei Yachid. That's the chelik of the Shalmei Yachid that went on the Mizbech. The Chazav Shaykh Shalem, that's the chelik of the Shalmei Yachid that was given over to the Kohanim. And then the Mishnah said, Echad ha'anoshim, that the mitzvah of tenufa relates both to men and women. However, be Yisrael, Avoloi Bachir. Zok the Gemara, Maikar. And Rashi explains that the Gemara thinks that be Yisrael, Avoloi Bachirim is coming to exclude Nashim. And if that's the case, we have a stira, one word of the Mishnah to the next word of the Mishnah. Here the Mishnah said, Echad ha'anoshim v'echad nashim. Women are included in the mitzvah of tenufa. And then the Mishnah says, Bi Yisrael avaloi b'acherim, which is mashma, nashim are excluded. So are women included or are they excluded? So the Gemara, my kamars, how do you reconcile this? Echad ha'anoshim v'echad nashim karbanim ta'an tenufa. Whether a man brings a carbon or a woman brings a carbon, their carbon is going to require tenufa. The tenufa atzma, however, as it relates to who does the tenufa, be Yisrael avaloi b'dei nashim. If a man is bringing it, then the bala carbon is going to participate in the actual tenufa. If a woman is the one bringing the carbon, then she will not participate. In other words, we saw on the top of the Yomid, how is tenufa done? So the kohen would do it together with the bailam. The kohen would take his hand, put it underneath the hand of the bailam, and together they would do the mitzvah of tenufa. That was only done if a man was bringing the carbon. But if a woman was bringing the carbon, then only the kohen would do it. The woman herself would not be involved. So when the Mishnah says Echad ha'anoshim v'echad nashim, it means the woman's carbon has tenufa. When the Mishnah says B'Yisrael avaloi b'acher, it means the woman herself did not participate in the tenufa. Tanu Rabban b'nei Yisrael menifin ve'ein oiv dekachavim menifin. Bnei Yisrael menifim ve'en hanoshim menifos. So in the context of Tenufa, the Torah says the words Bnei Yisrael, and from there we learn that it's Bnei Yisrael as opposed to Evdei Kechavim, it's Bnei Yisrael as opposed to Noshim. Rabbi Yossi elaborated on this. He said, Matzinu shechalak hakasav ein carbon Yisrael, the carbon Evdei Kechavim, le carbon Noshim besmicha. You find chilukim between a carbon Yisrael versus a carbon that a guy brings or a carbon that a woman brings with regards to smicha. A guy doesn't do smicha, a woman doesn't do smicha. Yochel nachlik b'tenufa. So I would think the same should be true by tenufa. Says Rabbi Yossi, one word, lie. Absolutely not. Why? Mali chalik b'smicha, shasmicha b'bailan. By smicha, the reason there's no smicha by a carbon of a guy and a carbon of an isha is because you need the bailam to do the smicha. And being that a woman can't do the smicha and a guy can't do the smicha, and Rashi adds he can't make a shliach to do the smicha, so you're right. There's no way to do it. But nachlik b'tenufa, shatrufa b'kayhanim. But you don't need to exclude tenufa from the carbon of a guy and the carbon of a woman, because although the woman herself and the guy himself cannot do the tenufa, like we just said, but a kohen also plays a role in the tenufa. And being that a kohen could do it, it's for that reason, there's no reason to exclude. So what then does it mean when we say Bnei Yisrael as opposed to a guy and a woman? I thought you just said that it's only by smicha they're excluded, but by tenufa they're not. What it means is Bnei Yisrael menifim ve'en avkechavim menifim, Bnei Yisrael menifim ve'en hanoshim menifos. It means physically, practically, who actually does the tenufa. So again, the Brisa and Rabbi Yossi with his elaboration, and Rabbi Yehuda who's reconciling our Mishnah. Everybody's saying the same thing. What everybody's saying is that if a woman brings a carbon, her carbon has a mitzvah of tenufa, stating that her tenufa is going to be a little bit different than an ordinary tenufa, because ordinarily the way tenufa goes down is that the bailim and the kohen together do the tenufa. If a woman brings the carbon, it's only the kohen that's going to do the tenufa. She herself, as the balabas of the carbon, is not going to do tenufa. When it comes to smicha, says the Gemara, FYI, when it comes to smicha, there a woman's carbon doesn't have smicha at all. And the reason is because just like a woman can't do tenufa, a woman can't do smicha, by tenufa the kohen also plays a role. By smicha there's no kohen playing a role. The smicha has to be done dafka by the bailam. And being that it has to be done dafka by the bailam, so being that a woman can't do it, there's no way to have smicha. But again, we're not learning the sugyas of smicha. We're learning the sugyas of tenufa. A guy's carbon and a woman's carbon has tenufa, stating that it's the kohen that does it, as opposed to the kohen doing it together with the bailam. One interesting thing is that there's clearly a discussion in the Gemara that without a pasuk, there would have been a havamina that the kohen together with the woman would do the tenufa. Now, the way the tenufa was done is that the kohen would have to put his hands underneath the hands of the woman, or underneath the hands of the bailam, and that's how the tenufa was done. So bishloima, if it's a man, so I understand. But if it's a woman, aren't you running into a negia issue? How would the kohen be allowed to put his hand underneath the hand of the woman? L'chayra, there's an issa negia. So how is this something that would be okay? So you'll tell me maybe it's not derech hiba. That's not so pashut at all. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about this in tomorrow's daf. But regardless, vayter tanya idach bnei Yisrael ein li'el bnei Yisrael gerim va'avadim mishuchrarim. It says in the parasha of Smicha, Bnei Yisrael, and from there I would think maybe Bnei Yisrael, but maybe someone that was only born a Yid. But what about a Ger? Or an Evet Kanani that had Shichra that now became a Yid? And maybe they're not included in the mitzvah of tenufa. Talmud loymer hamakriv. It says in the Torah hamakriv. Hamakriv is mar begerim and avadim v'shachram that they're included in the mitzvah of tenufa. Oh, you know, if you the Gemara, elazek koyin hamakriv. Maybe when it says hamakriv, what it's coming to teach me is that the makriv, the one that does the avodah, he should be the one that does the tenufa. That it's only the koyin that does the tenufa. We already had earlier in the Amid from the Gzeira Shava. It says in Mefurish actually by the Shalmei Yachid that the Bailam were involved in the mitzvah of tenufa. So it can't be that Makriv is coming to teach me only the Kohen does the tenufa. What is a Makriv teaching me? Gerim and Avadim Meshuchrorim, they also have a mitzvah of tenufa. Says the Gemara, Ha Ketzad. Now it's not clear what the Gemara's kasha now is of Ha Ketzad. What's bothering me? Ha Ketzad, it's like we're coming to explain something. What's Ha Ketzad? So Rashi says, Ha Ketzad is that if it's from Yodev to Vienna, the pasuk that the Gemara just brought, by the Shalmei Yachid, we know that the Bailam does the tenufa. It says hamakriv, which means the kohen does tenufa, which is a little bit of a kasha because the Gemara just said hamakriv is not coming to teach me that the kohen does tenufa. Hamakriv is coming to teach me gerim and avodim mishuchrorim. But either way, the Gemara asks ha ketzad kohen miniach yodei tachas idei bailam umeinav. At the end of the day, the kohen does tenufa, the bailam does tenufa. They do it together. And they do it by the kohen putting his hand underneath the hands of the bailam. Ketzad oisa meniach emurim al pisa sayad v'chaza v'shoik aleh. in the context of a Shalmei Yachid, the way that Tenufa was done, again, the Mishnah said, Tenufa with the Shalmei Yachid was done with two parts of the karp. It was done with the Chalav, and that's the part that's going to go on the Mizbeach, and it was done with the Chaz of the Shaykh. That's the part that's going to be given over to the Kayan. So the Kate said, you put the Emurim on top of your hand. The Chaz of the Shaykh aleihen. So you have the Kayan's hand on bottom, the Bailam's hand on top of that. You have the Chalavim on top of that. The Chaz of the Shaykh on top of that. And by the way, if there's bread involved in the Tenufa, halechem il maila. The bread's going to be on top of that. Heicha, what's that referring to? Rashi says, Heicha ashkechon lechem, the lechem l'maila. More about this in tomorrow's daf. So the Gemara says, Amra Papa ben Miluim. It's referring to the Miluim, Ahiba Mashmini, there was lechem, there was Tenufa, the lechem was supposed to be on top. So to Gemara, my time. How do you know that in the standard Tenufa of the Shalmei Yachid, that involves both the Emurim, the Chalav and the one of the Mizbeach, and the Chaz of Shaykh that was given to the Kehanim, how do you know that the Chaz of Shaykh is supposed to be on top of the Emur? Ilem mishum dechsev Shaykat Shruma, v'chazei ha-Tenufa, al ishei ha-Chalavim, yoviu lahanef Tenufa. I mean, this is a pretty good pasuk. It says, the Shaykat Shruma, that's the Shaykh, v'chazei Tenufa, that's the Chaza. Thus the Chaza and the Shaykh. In this pasuk, it's the Shaykh and the Chaza. Al Yishei HaChalavim, put them on top of the Chalavim to do the Tenufa. So it's pretty clear, right? But the Gemara says, Vaksiv, there's another pasuk that says, in this, the es hachelev al hachaza yaviu. It sounds like the chelev used to be on top of the chaza. Amar Abaya. So Abaya says, "Ahuda ma'isi like koyim beis betchaim." It's talking about two different stages. When the pasuk says it's hachelev al hachaza yavienu, that's talking about when the kohen's bringing it. Where's he bringing it? From the kitchen, from the shlachtos. He's bringing it from the beis hamitbachayim. Over there, the chelev was on top of the chaza. But the first pasuk, shaykat shruma v'chazei atnufa alisha achalav and yaviu lahanef tenufa. That's talking about. We're discussing tenufa. We're not talking about what the positioning was when it was being brought from the Beis HaMitbachayim. We're talking about what the positioning was by the mitzvah of Tenufa, and there it's very clear. The Shaykat Shum and the Chazayat Tenufa was on top of the Ishei HaChalavim. But the Gemara says, is that true? There's another pasuk. Vayasimu es HaChalavim al HaChazois. You put the Chalavim on top of the Chazois, on top of the Chazah. So there's another pasuk that seems to suggest that the Chelav was on top of the Chazah. So the Gemara says, Ahuda Yavle the Kohen Achrina va'azalu Makdalei. That's talking about after you did the Tenufa, the Kohen would take the Chazah, this Shaykh and Emurim, and he would pass it over now to another kohen, and that kohen would go and he would do the haktar. V'hakamashmalan, and this is the chiddush, the bein and shloisha kohenim, that there were three kohanim that had to be involved in the haktara. And what's the reason for it? The more kohanim, the more beautiful the avodah is going to be. This is shirus. This is like real avodah. So madach when it comes to tefillah, avodah shabalev, the avodah that we have today in Golos, there's an idea of beroivam hadras melech. Kal v'chaymer ben b'nai shel kal v'chaymer in the Beit HaMikdash itself. There was certainly an idea of beroivam hadras melech. So what's Pashup Shan in this Gemara? So the way Rashi explains the Gemara is that a kohen would take the parts of the animal from the Beis HaMitbachayim, that's where everything was being prepared. So you did the shchita and the azara, then it goes to the Beis HaMitbachayim where they start sorting out the different parts of the animal, the butchers, the kayanim, they're all working on it. And now they go to one of the kayanim and they give him the chalavim and the chaz of a shaykh. He has to go do the mitzvah of tenufa. So they would give him the chaz of a shaykh and they would put the chelav on top. He would bring it to the kohen by the mizbeach who has to do the mitzvah of tenufa. When he would give it to him, he would pass it over to him. The way he would pass it over to him, he would flip it. So if this kohen right now, who's walking from the Beis HaMitbachayim, is holding it in a way with the chaz of a shaykh on the bottom and the chalavim are on top, when he passes it over and flips it, so now it's going to be in the reverse. So now the chalavim is going to be on the bottom and the chaz of a shaykh is going to be on top. He does the trufa. That kohen now passes it over to a third kohen who's going to do the actual haktara. When he passes over to the third kohen, he flips it again. So this idea of having the chalavim on top and then the chaz of a shaykh on top and then the chalavim on top, what's the significance? You know what the significance is? It's not the same kohen who keeps on flipping it. Va'istais, we have three kohanim. That's what the Gemara is saying. You see, you have three kohanim because it's as one is handing it over to the other one. The way he's handing it to him is by flipping it to him. Also, you see three kohanim. That already has a chashivas. That makes a lot of sense. That's based on the idea of beroi vam hadras melech exhale. So either way, we learned a very straightforward daf regarding the mitzvahs of tenufa. A lot more about tenufa in tomorrow's daf. But just to shtel zach on one interesting thing, the Mishnah said that Bikurim has a mitzvah of tenufa. Kidivrei Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. And the Gemara asked the kasha: is it only according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov that there's a mitzvah of tenufa. L'chura, there's a mitzvah of tenufa according to Rabbi Yehuda as well. There's a brayso where Rabbi Yehuda says that Bikurim also has a mitzvah of tenufa. Says the Gemara, two teruts. One teretz says Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov learned it from a pasuk that's earlier in the parasha of Bikurim than Rabbi Yehuda's pasuk. So we picked the Tana who learns it from the earlier source versus the Tana that learns it from the later source. Second teretz, Nachman by Yitzchak Kamahoyel Rav Gavre. No, it's very simple. The Gemara wasn't going to mention all the Tanam, so we're mentioning one Tana. We could pick between Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and Rabbi Yehuda. Loi Mishpat HaBechayra goes to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. You know why? Rav Gavre. It's like Rashi. What does that mean? English. Shehu Chacham b'Yoser, because he was a greater Chacham. And how do you know he was a greater Chacham? The Kaimalon Mishnas Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Kavinaki, which means that there's not a lot of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, but Naki, the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So being that the halacha follows Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, so it's for that reason that we picked Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, we didn't pick Rabbi Yehuda. Now, at first glance, it bothered me a little bit that it's true, Mishnas Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is Kavinaki. Meaning, we paskin the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. But is the halacha not like Rabbi Yehuda? The Gemara says in Masechtas Eruvin that Mem Vav Amid Beis that whenever there's a machlokes between Rameh and Rabbi Yehuda, the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. Whenever there's a machlokes between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda, the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. So the halacha is very often like Rabbi Yehuda. So if the halacha is very often like Rabbi Yehuda, it's true. On the one hand, the Gemara says in Gittin Samach Zayin and in other places in Shas that Mishnas Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is Kavanaki, but L'chura isn't the halacha very often like Rabbi Yehuda as well. But I think Pashup Shah is. It's Rashi L'Shitasa. Because if you look at Rashi, Masechtas Gittin Daf Samach Zayin Amud Aleph, says Rashi, Mishnas Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov Kavanaki, Loi Li made Harbe Kishar Chaveirav. Mishnas Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov was Kav, meaning it's a little bit of Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov. He didn't teach, he didn't give as many shiurim as his Chaveirim, as some of the other Tanaim. Ella, however, Masha Omer bebeis hamedrash. But whatever he said, Nokihu, shehalacha kemoisei la'olam. The halacha is always like Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov. In other words, Mishnas Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov Kavanaki doesn't mean that the halacha is sometimes like Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov. The halacha is often like Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov. Rashi's lashon is that the halach is kemoisei le'olam. So if the halach is kemoisei le'olam, Rashi l'shitasi is gevaldik. Because although the Gemara says in Eruvin that wherever Rabbi Yehuda argued, the halach is like Rabbi Yehuda, and wherever Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Yehuda argued, the halach is like Rabbi Yehuda. But that same Gemara says wherever Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda argue, and there's a lot of Rabbi Yossis and Rabbi Yehudas in Shas, the halach is like Rabbi Yossi. So the halach is not like Rabbi Yehuda le'olam. So what's unique about Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is that it's Naki in the sense that halacha kemoisei la'olam, as opposed to Rabbi Yehuda, where although halacha is very often kemoisei, but it's not la'olam. And being that it's not la'olam, that's what the Gemara means to say. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov has a maila, he was chacham b'yoser, that it's halacha kemoisei la'olam, in contrast to Rabbi Yehuda, where you don't find this idea shehalacha kemoisei la'olam. But the truth is that this Rashi is a very big chiddush, and there's many ha'aras on Rashi and rayas from Rishonim that not everybody agreed with Rashi, where Rashi says that Mishnas Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Kavanaki means halacha kemoisei la'olam. I mean, the most obvious maramakim, and something we've spoken out many times in Daf, is the Rosh. The Rosh is also in Masechtas Eruvin. It's in the fourth parak of Masechtas Eruvin, and the Rosh over there is learning a sugya, and he comes out in the sugya not like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Frank the Rosh, how could I come out lahalacha not like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov? Mishnas Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is Kavanaki. So the Rosh, Ki kosav Rabbeinu Chanan Zal mipia Kabbalah that he heard from a Messiah the bekuf beis dvarim halacha kemoisei v'sulai. Mishnas Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is kav v'naki. Kav is bigamatria 102. There's 102 places says Rabbeinu Chanan that the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, but it's not halacha kemoisei le'olam. It's only in 102 places. Says the Rosh v'shem zois ena min aminyan kav. Maybe this sugya that I'm coming at, I think it's mashma not like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is not from the 102. If it's not from the 102, I'm not meshubet to paskin like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, because you could always argue that it's not from those. But the bottom line is, so Rashi says in Gittin Samach Zayin Amud Aleph, halacha kemoisei la'olam. So we have a Rosh in Eruvin in the fourth parak. If you want to look it up, it's in Siman Beis, who quotes Rabbeinu Chananel, who says Mishnas Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Kav 102, and right away the Rosh is saying a chiddush la'alocha v'shem ezois enam in aminyan Kav. But the bottom line is, you see, it's not halacha kemoisei la'olam because it's only in 102 places. Another maramakim is a Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchas Beis HaBchira, Perik Beis Halacha Yud Ches. The context over there, it's in Hilchas Beis HaBchira, is Kachem, but it's really based on a sugya, not in Zvachim and Menachos. It's more a sugya Mesechtes Chulin. And the Gemara, The Rambam is discussing laws related to Pkimas HaMizbeach, Nifkam HaMizbeach. That is something that comes up in Masechtas Vachim. What happens if the Mizbeach was Nifkam? It got chipped. It's not in its perfect state. How does that impact halachas? Okay. The Gemara in Chulin Yudches brings up Brisa. A machlokes Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov, what the shear of Pkimas HaMizbeach is as it relates to these halachas. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai says tefach. That if the Mizbeach was nifkam a tefach, you have that whole Shulchan Aruch. Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer Kezayis. So what does the Rambam say? The Rambam in Hilchos Beis Abchira Perek Beis Halacha Yudches Mizbeach shenifkam ibinyanoi. Im nifkam ibinyanoi tefach. If the pkima was a tefach, pasul. Pachas mi tefach. In other words, in the Brais and Chum Yudches Amar Aleph, it's Machlokes Reb Shimon and Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov. Reb Shimon Yochai Omer Tefach. Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer Kezayis. Comes again the Rambam, the Posek in his Yad Chazaka in Nifkam mi binyanai. How much? Tefach pasul. Break the Kesef Mishnah. It's a pella. The Rambam's paskin tefach. That's Shitas Rashbi. It's not the Shita Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov. We know the rule. Mishnah's Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov is kavanok. Says the Kesef Mishnah v'zel l'shoynei hazav u'posek Rabbeinu Reb Shimon Bar Yochai mishum demare de Talmudahu. You know why? Because Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is demare de Talmudah. Tfeimi Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov. Right? Mishnah's Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov is kav. That's the first part of the memra. There's not a lot of Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov. But Reb Shimon is the Chmara de Talmudah. He's one of the key players in Talmud Bavli. Throughout Shas, you have Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. So the Rambam felt that if I could paskin between Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov, I'm going to go with the Mara de Talmudah. That's Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Says the Kesef Mishnah, V'afal the Kaimel of Mishnah, Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov Kavanaki. This is half of a fella. What a maramakim. Ef shizok the Kesef Mishnah, Dahani Mili ben Mishnah. Could be that's only in Mishnah. Avaloi bebraisa. Says the Kesef Mishnah, you have to medayik every single word in this memra. Mishnas, Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov, Kav, V'Naki. Working backwards. Naki means halacha k'moisai. Kav, we're not sure. There's not a lot of Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov. There's Rabbeinu Chananel that says you even have to be medayik the gematria of Kav. It's 102. Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov, that's pretty straightforward. And Mishnas, Zok the Kesef Mishnah means only Mishnah, as opposed to what? As opposed to a Braisa. It's only in Mishnayos that this rule applies. But when it comes to Braisas, it does a halacha. If that's the case, the Rambam sat down and he said, I have a Braisa, not a Mishnah. A Braisa, Masechtas Chulin, Daf Yud Ches Amar Aleph, where the Gemara brings a machlekes, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov. Is the halacha like Reb Shimon Bar Yochai? Is the halacha like Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov? I don't know. Should I use the rule of Mishnah's Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov Kavanaki? Said the Kesef Mishnah, the Rambam couldn't use that rule because that was only true by Mishnayos. So now the Rambam was back to the drawing board. I don't know. Who do I follow? Do I follow Reb Shimon Bar Yochai or do I follow Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov? Zok the Kesef Mishnah. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is Mari de Talmudah who tfeim Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov, and that's a svara when it comes to Achroim Sak Halacha, and it's for that reason that the Kesef Mishnah says that the Rambam paskin like Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. I saw in the Seder Hadairis from Bechiel Halpern, he brings a tshuva from the Chacham Tzvi. So I looked up the tshuva from the Chacham Tzvi, and the Chacham Tzvi has a whole tshuva. It's Shaila Yud, and Shaila's tshuva is Chacham Tzvi, and it's all about Mishnah's Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov Kavanaki. And he begins with this Rambam and this Kesef Mishnah, and he's mafalful in the Kesef Mishnah, and he asks one kasha that pertains to today's daf and to Ray that we speak about all the time. Freit the Kesef, Freit the Chacham Tzvi, let's do the back of the envelope arithmetic. The Kesef Mishnah said that a chiddush, that Mishnah's Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov Kavanaki is only true by Mishnayos, it's not true by Braises. So he had a Braisa the Rambam did. A machlokes Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov wasn't sure who to paskin like. He didn't feel that Mishnah's Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov is a svar of achra. As a result, the Rambam said, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is Mari de Talmudah. Says the Chacham Tzvi, I have achra from Menachos Daf Samach Aleph Amud Beis that the halacha should be like Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov. You know why? Because the Gemara was comparing Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov and Reb Yehuda. The Mishnah said, Bekurim needs snufa kedivin Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov. Why Reb Yehuda is nicht? Reb Yehuda is like Hamam as a kind. How come the Mishnah doesn't mention Reb Yehuda? Says the Gemara, he was Rav Guvrei. Wasn't his Rav Guvrei? Says Rashi, Chacham the Yoser, because in Psak, we follow Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov more than we follow Reb Yehuda. Mishnah's Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov's Kavanaki. Reb Yehuda, even though the Gemara says very often halacha k'maisai, but not so much. Says the Chacham Tzvi, I would walk away from this Gemara thinking, if there was a machlokes between Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov and Reb Yehuda, the halacha is for sure like Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov. I think it's a Gemara. I think it's Menachos Samach Aleph Amud Aleph. So even though it's not mentioned anywhere in the Klolei Apsak, but that does state in the Gemara. That's Hoil Rav Guvrei. in Psak Halacha. That's why Rashi was mefarish the Gemara. That means that's Pashim Shana in the Gemara. So, l'chura, if it comes to a shaila between Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and Rabbi Yehuda, the halacha is going to be like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. The Gemara says in Masechtas Eruvin, Mem Vav Amud Beis, that if there's a machlokes between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda, the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. So do the math. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Rabbi Yehuda, the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. So what happens if you have a machlokes Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and Rabbi Shimon? Of course, the halacha is going to be, it's basic logic, going to be like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So the Kesef Mishnah said that the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon because he's married the Talmud at Tfei, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Says the Chacham Tzvi, what about my cheshbon? Hafla of a fellow. Says the Chacham Tzvi, I'm going to say a different shot in this Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchos Beis Abchira, again, that paskin like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the Bryce and Chul, Daf Yud Chesed and Aleph, and not Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. And that's based on another Rambam. And this Rambam is in the Hilchos where Tzeach, the Shmiras HaNefesh, it's in Perek Tes, Halacha Tes. When you learn these types of Gemaras, you get a nice, you get to spend Shas a little bit. Either way, so what's this halacha? The context over there is a sugi Masechta Soita Daf Mem He. They found a dead body. It's between two cities. We have to measure and see which city it's closest to, so we can go ahead with the parsha of the Egla Rufa. The question is, from what part of the chala, what part of this dead body do we measure? Meheichen moededen, says the Rambam, mechait moi. You're supposed to do it from the chaitim, from the nose of the mace. That's where you do the menida. Freik the Kesef Mishnah. So the last stuff we learned together, we spoke about a bunch of Kesef Mishnahs. Here we have again Kesef Mishnahs, very different context, but Kesef Mishnahs. Mishnah says the Perek Egla Rufa. It's really a Mishnah. Perek Egla Rufa, which is then the Masechta Soita Daf Mem He Amud Beis. Now from where did they measure? Rabbi Eliezer Omer Mitivurai. Rabbi Akiva Omer Mechait. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer Mimakom Shenase Cholo Mitzavarai. Upasak Rabbi Akiva. So it's a three-way machlokes, and that's a Mishnah. It's a Mishnah in Perek Egla Rufa. So again, where did they measure from? Did they measure from Tivurai? As I helped Rabbi Eliezer. Mechait, that's Shitas Rabbi Akiva. Or from the Mokim, where the cholol is, where the wound is, that's the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. The Rambam says, Michait moi, that's sheet of Rabbi Akiva. In other words, the Rambam paskind like Rabbi Akiva over Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Freit the Kesef Mishnah, v'yesh lot maya. Dog kaimel Mishnah's Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov kavanaki. And here the Kesef Mishnah couldn't say what he said in Perek Beis, Halacha Yud Ches and Hilchas Beis Abchira, because that it's a brisa. It's not a brisa, it's a Mishnah. In Chul and Yud Ches and Aleph, it's a brisa. But in Soita Mem He Amud Beis, which is the Makar to this Rambam in Perek Tes, Halacha Tes and Hilchas Ritzei Cheshmeris and Nefesh, is the Mishnah. Mishnah's Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is for sure kavanaki. So how are you going to give us a chanetzah? So what would the Rosh tell you? The Rosh would say, maybe this is not from the 102. Okay? But either way, he says the Kesef Mishnah, you have to say another tremendous yisoid. The Gemara says in Erev and Vavam days, whenever there's a machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Chaveroi, the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva. Says the Kesef Mishnah, what happens if I have two klali ashas that are colliding head on? On the one hand, I have Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Mishnah's Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov kavanaki. But on the other hand, he's arguing with Rabbi Akiva. V'halacha Rabbi Akiva mechaverei. How do I know which one comes first? Says the Kesef Mishnah, that's this Rambam. The Rambam must have held that if I have that kind of issue, halacha Rabbi Akiva mechaverei takes precedence. Thus, although you have a Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov in a Mishnah, and it's true, Mishnah Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov kavanaki, but on the other side, I have halacha Rabbi Akiva mechaverei. And the Rambam held halacha Rabbi Akiva mechaverei is machriya over Mishnah's Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov kavanaki. Haflo. So you have two beautiful Kesef Mishnahs, two tremendous yisoides regarding this halacha of Mishnah's Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. But says the Chacham Tzvi, if that's the case, I want to tell you a davar nifla. You know, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva. Shimon Bar Yochai was a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva. It's yitachen, says the Chacham Tzvi, that if Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said something in Beis Medrash, he was quoting his Groiser Rebbe, Rabbi Akiva. Now, the truth is, very often, the halacha is not like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So if the halacha very often is not like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, why don't you ask a kasha, says the Chacham Tzvi? If Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is Rabbi Akiva midaber mitoich groinoi, and halacha Rabbi Akiva mechaveroi, so how does it shnim with those gemaras in Masechtas Eruvin Daf Mem Vav Amud Beis? Listen to this. That the Gemara comes out, the halacha is very often not like Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Yehuda, halacha Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Yosi, halacha Rabbi Yosi. Says the Chacham Tzvi, the teretz is so pashit because Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosi were also talmidim of Rabbi Akiva. So although it's true, if Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is talking in Beis Medrash, you're supposed to hear Rabbi Akiva talking, and once it's Rabbi Akiva talking, halacha Rabbi Akiva mechaveirav. But if he's arguing with other of Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim, so then it's all Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim. So you don't have the achra of halachic Rabbi Akiva Chaver. So if there's a machlokes between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda, there's no hechrach to say that halacha is like Rabbi Shimon because he's a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva. Because Rabbi Yehuda is also Talmud Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yossi is also Talmud Rabbi Akiva. But what happens if you have Rabbi Shimon and there's no Baal Plukta in Shas? He's not arguing with anybody, or he's arguing with someone that wasn't a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva. Says the Chacham Tzvi, it's Yitachen that this is Rabbi Shimon who's quoting it's Rabbi Akiva. It's Rabbi Akiva midaber mitoich groinoi, and it's going to take on the koyach in halacha of halacha Rabbi Akiva mechavera. This price in the Masechta School in Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph is a machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov wasn't a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva, so it's a machlokes Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai was a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov wasn't. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai has the koyach of Rabbi Akiva. Thus, we essentially have a machlokes Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. What's the Rambam shita? If you have a machlokes, that's before the Rambam. Hilchos Reitzach Shmiras HaNefesh Perek Tes Halacha Tes. Kesmish said it himself. He said that the halacha Rabbi Akiva mechaveroi trumps Mishnas Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Kavanaki. That machlokes between Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov in Chulin Yud Ches Amud Aleph is really a machlokes Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Thus, the reason that the Rambam paskin like Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai in Perek Beis Halacha Yud Ches and Hilchos Beis Abchiros for the same exact reason that he paskin like Rabbi Akiva and Hilchos Reitzach Shmiras HaNefesh Perek Tes Halacha Tes. It's the identical reason. It's both halacha Rabbi Akiva mechaveroi. Half of a fella. But just to be moisef one ha'ara, and that is the Kesef Mishnah said that Pshat in the Rambam in Perek Beis, Halacha Yud Ches and Hilchos Beis Abchira, that the Rambam paskin like Rashbi when it comes to the Shir Pkimas HaMizbeach, not like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, is because the whole klal of Mishnahs Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Kavanaki relates only to Mishnayos. It doesn't relate to Brises. Thus, by Brises, the Rambam had to figure out who I should be machriya like, and he held Rav Shbi is the Mori, the Kula Talmuda, Tfei mi, Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov, and that's why he passed like Rav Shbi. And the Chacham Tzvi in Siman Yud asks the Gevaldige Kasha. He says that the Gemara says in Menachos Samachalef Amud Aleph, our daf, that Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov was Rav Guvrei over Rav Yehuda, and Rav Yehuda, Rav Shimon, the halacha is like Rav Yehuda. So Kal v'chaymer, Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov, Rav Shimon, the halacha should be like Rav Eliezer ben Yaakov. But it could be pshatz like this, based on a vart from the Divrei Yoel, the Heilige Satmaruv that we spoke out only a few weeks ago. That is, there's a machlokes between the Rambam and the Chachmei Lunil. We'll speak it out quickly again. Regarding Gid HaNasha. Gid HaNasha, the minyan HaMitzvahs, is mitzvah 3. In the Chinuch, the third mitzvah is Shlo Yilechel Gid HaNasha. And there's a machlokes, Rishonim, the Rambam and the Chachmei Lunil, where the Gid HaNasha, which of course is Asa B'Achila, is it also Asa B'Hana, or is it Muta B'Hana? The Rambam Shita is that the Gid HaNasha is Muta B'Hana. The Chachmei Lunil hold that the Gid HaNasha is Aser B'Hana. And the Beis Yosef asks that really this machlokes Rambam and Chachmei Lunil is machlokes in the Gemara. It's a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda says Gid HaNasha is Muta B'Hana. Rabbi Shimon says Gid HaNasha is Asa B'Hana. In other words, the Rambam passing like Rabbi Yehuda, and the Chachmei Lunil passing like Rabbi Shimon. And for the Beis Yosef, we know the rule. Whenever there's machlokes Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. So what's pshat in the Chachmei Lunil? Again, we're not learning the sugis of Gid HaNasha, but in the spirit of Klolei Apsak, you have a Shaila Gid HaNasha, which is Asa B'Achila. Is it Asa B'Hana? Is it Muta B'Hana? The Rambam paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. The Chachmei Lunil paskin like Rabbi Shimon. Freik the Beis Yosef, the obvious question: whenever there's a machlokes Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yehuda, the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. The Rambam, I understand. The Chachmei Lunil is a pella. Says the Beis Yosef, Shuv Matzasi, that it's a mefurish in Zohar HaKadosh. The Zohar HaKadosh says that not only is a person not allowed to eat Gid HaNasha, he can't even have hana from Gid HaNasha. If the Zohar says you can't have hana from Gid HaNasha, so it's Yitachen that the Chachmei Lunil knew the Zohar, and they were paskening like the Zohar. So of course the Chachmei Lunil knew that you can't pasken like a Rab Shimon Keneged Rabbi Yehuda, but that's when there's no Hachra. I have Hachra. The Hachra is the Zohar. The Zohar says mefurish that it's also B'Hana. Says the Rabban Darkei Moshe, Shamati, I heard, it was a little bit unclear, but says the Darkei Moshe, Shamati, Shabal Mechaber Sefer Zohar HaKadosh, who stand Rab Shimon B'Shas, Shehu Rab Shimon bar Yochai. If that's the case, what's Dr. Beis Yosef? That pshat in the Chachmei Lunil, that paskin like Rab Shimon over Rab Yehuda, Gam Dalach is always like Rab Yehuda over Rab Shimon, is because it's a Zohar. Of course it's a Zohar. What did the Beis Yosef find in the Zohar? The Zohar is Rab Shimon bar Yochai. So all he found is that Reb Shimon l'shitasai. We know Reb Shimon shita, but the halacha is still not like Reb Shimon. Because whenever there's a machlokes between Reb Yehuda and Reb Shimon, the halacha is like Reb Yehuda. So freik the darkei Moshe, was tutzachta? This is this right? What's going on here? Did the Beis Yosef not know that the mechaber of the Zohar Kadosh was Rashbi? So if the mechaber is Reb Shimon, all it is another Reb Shimon Bayechai. We knew that already. The halacha is not like Reb Shimon Bayechai. Keneged Reb Yehuda. Zok the Heilige Satmarav in Parshas Vayeshev in Divrei Yoel. You can look it up. He says based on a Gemara, well-known Gemara Masechta Shabbos. The Gemara is in Masechta Shabbos Taf Lamed Gimel. The context is after Reb Shimon Bayechai and his son Reb Shimon, they came out of the Ma'ara 12 years, and the Gemara over there says they met Reb Pinchas ben Yair. And when Reb Pinchas ben Yair saw Reb Shimon Bayechai, he said, "Oy li sheri sicha b'kach." Obviously, Reb Shimon Bayechai had just lived in a cave for so many years, and physically, he looked like he lived in a cave for so many years. And Reb Pinchas ben Yair was so taken aback when he saw him that he commented, "Oy li sheri sicha b'kach." Amar leis, Reb Shimon Bayechai told him, "Ashrecha sheri yisani b'kach." To the contrary, Ashrecha that you see me this way. Shel molei lo yisini b'kach le matzasi b'kach. He says, because although physically I deteriorated really, really terribly. Thus, I looked the way I looked during those years. But spiritually, I steig gewaldig. Says the Gemara, how much did he steig? The Gemara explains, the Mikara, before Reb Shimon Bayechai entered the Ma'ara, ki havi makshi Reb Shimon Bayechai kushya, Reb Shimon Bayechai would ask Reb Pinchas ben Yair kasha, have a mefarek Reb Pinchas ben Yair tresa piruki. Reb Pinchas ben Yair would give him 12 terutzim. So Reb Pinchas ben Yair and Reb Shimon Bayechai were talking and learning. Reb Shimon Bayechai was the Talmud, he was the one asking, and Reb Pinchas ben Yair was the one giving the answer. And Reb Pinchas ben Yair had so much more shlita over Reb Shimon Bayechai in Torah that what Reb Shimon Bayechai didn't understand, Reb Pinchas ben Yair had 12 lumduses, had to go ahead and explain. But the B'Saif, Reb Shimon Bayechai came out of the Ma'ara, it was just the opposite. Kavi match Reb Pinchas ben Yair kushya. Reb Pinchas ben Yair would be the one asking the questions, and Reb Shimon Bayechai would tell him, not one teretz, not 12 terutzim, have a mefarek le Rashbi, esrim varba peruki, 24 terutzim. Says the Satmarav, you see that Reb Shimon Bayechai steiged in Torah, half of a fellow when he was in the Ma'ara. If that's the case, says the Divrei, it could be that this rule, that the halacha is like Reb Yehuda over Reb Shimon, that was Reb Shimon kodim the Ma'ara. Before the Ma'ara, where he was a Talmud Keneged Reb Pinchas ben Yair, he would ask a kasha 12 terutzim. In that Reb Shimon, the halacha is not like Reb Shimon, not Keneged Reb Yehuda. That halacha is not like Reb Shimon, not Keneged Reb Yossi. The other Talmidim of Reb Akiva were maybe greater than him. Thus, the halacha is not going to be like Reb Shimon. But Reb Shimon after the Ma'ara, that's a whole different Reb Shimon. That's Reb Shimon from the Madregas. That Reb Shimon is going to be different. When did Reb Shimon Bayechai write the Zohar HaKadosh? He wrote it after the Ma'ara. Says the Divrei, that's Pshat in the Beis Yosef. Beis Yosef asked the Kash and the Chacham, how could you possibly Reb Shimon over Reb Yehuda? Isn't the rule like Reb Yehuda? Zok Shuv Matzasi, that it's a Zohar. Oh, it's a Zohar. That means this is not just a Reb Shimon from Kodim the Ma'ara. This is a Reb Shimon from Nach the Ma'ara. Because when the Reb Shimon Bayechai write the Zohar, that was Nach the Ma'ara. If that was Nach the Ma'ara, by the way, the Tanya writes in Tanya that what Reb Shimon Bayechai learned in the Ma'ara, he learned Nigla. It says everybody thinks he learned Nistar in the Ma'ara, he learned Nigla. It's Ma'od Matim with this rate, right? But he learned Nigla. Bottom line is, he comes out after 12 years of learning Havayis Dabaya V'Rava, Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, Bava Basra. This Reb Shimon Bayechai is already a whole different Reb Shimon Bayechai. That's the Beis Yosef. Initially, he thought it was only Reb Shimon and Shas. Oh, it's a Reb Shimon and Shas. Okay, I guess Reb Shimon and Shas. The halacha is like Reb Yehuda, but it's a Zohar. Oh, now we know it's a Reb Shimon from La'achad the Ma'ara. That Reb Shimon is a different Reb Shimon based on the Gemara and Shabbos on the Gimel on the base. Over there, the halacha is going to be like Reb Shimon. Okay, so just one ha'ara, and that is, I found there's a sefer called Ben Yochai. So there's hashtag rest of the story with regards to the sefer Ben Yochai, not for this morning, but the sefer Ben Yochai, as you would expect, talks about Reb Shimon bar Yochai. In the sefer Ben Yochai, in Shar Aleph, it says as follows: Roiv, many times in Shas, Reb Shimon is mentioned as Stam Reb Shimon. In fact, Roiv Pa'amim b'Shas, says the Ben Yochai, Muskir b'Shas b'Shmoy levad Reb Shimon. Stam Reb Shimon and Shas Reb Shimon Bayechai. Ulepa'amim. There are some times, however, that Reb Shimon is mentioned in Shas in Shem Aviv. Reb Shimon Bayechai says the Sefer Ben Yochai. Vahu. Shalifnei ha'maisa the ha'ma'ara. Before the ma'ara, kara'u Reb Shimon. Ula'acha sheyatzim in ha'ma'ara. After he left the ma'ara, kara'u Reb Shimon Bayechai. As I state in Sefer Ben Yochai be'arichos. So he says that there's two Reb Shimons. You want to know if Reb Shimon is Stam Reb Shimon, is Reb Shimon before the ma'ara, or Reb Shimon is Reb Shimon from La'achad the ma'ara? Look at how he's mentioned in Shas. If it's mentioned as Reb Shimon, it's Reb Shimon before the ma'ara. If it's mentioned as Reb Shimon Bayechai, it's mentioned as Reb Shimon La'achad the ma'ara. This Reb Shimon in Masechtas Chulin Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph Sagt the Braisa. Kam up kimas am Mizbeach. Reb Shimon ben Yochai oimer tefach. Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov oimer kezayis. This Reb Shimon is not Stam Reb Shimon. This Reb Shimon is Reb Shimon ben Yochai. Reb Shimon ben Yochai is Reb Shimon from Lachamara. Reb Shimon from Lachamara, the Divrei Yoel already was megala to us that Reb Shimon is different. That Reb Shimon, the halacha is like Reb Shimon keneged Reb Yehuda v'chaver. You don't have the rule that halacha Reb Yehuda keneged Reb Shimon. As I bezayis in nidda kai kasha. The Kesef Mishnah wanted to say pshat in the Rambam, in Perek Beis Halacha Yiches and Hilchos Beis Abchira, that the Rambam paskin like Reb Shimon over Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov. I Mishnas Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov Kavanaki. What's the teretz? That's only Mishnah, not by Braisa. What do you do by Braisa? Says Reb Shimon by Yochai is more the Talmud Tvei. So I think the halacha is to be like Reb Shimon. Freit the Chacham Tzvi. What do you mean? How's the Shimon Menachos Samachalaf on the base? The Menachos Samachalaf on the base. You see, Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov is Rav Gufrei over Reb Yehuda, and Reb Yehuda we know is more than Reb Shimon. Must be Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov is more than Reb Shimon also. The teretz is Reb Yehuda is more than Stam Reb Shimon. Reb Yehuda is not more than Reb Shimon by Yochai. This is Reb Shimon by Yochai. Oh, that Gemara Menachos has zero relevance to this discussion. If that's the case, Reb Shimon by Yochai is more than Talmud Tvei. By the way, the Divrei Yoel said it to be Miyashiv or Beis Yosef. Who wrote the Kesef Mishnah? The Beis Yosef wrote the Kesef Mishnah. So it could be it's the Beis Yosef l'shitasei. The bottom line is it's the Kesef Mishnah, it's the Beis Yosef in Yeridei Siman Samachei. Vadvarim Nefla. But coming full circle. So we started off with a Gemara, where the Gemara says, Reb Nachman by Yitzchak Amar. You want to know why the Mishnah mentions Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov and not Reb Yehuda? The reason is Hayil v'Rab Gavrei. Zok Rashi, he was a Chacham b'Yoser. Was he a Chacham b'Yoser? Because Mishnah is Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov, Kavanaki. So we spoke right in the beginning that I think Rashi is L'shitasei. Because Rashi says in Gittin, Samach Zayin and Aleph, Halacha k'moisei li'olam. But as we just saw, it's not so pashut that Halacha k'moisei li'olam. Number one, we had the Rosh in the fourth parak of Masechtas Eruvin, who brings from Rabbeinu Chananel that says Kav is Gematria 100. It's only 102 times that the halacha is like Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov. Number two, we have the Kesef Mishnah Perek Beis Halacha Yiches and Hilchos Beis Abchira, where it says it's only in a Mishnah. It's Mishnas Reb Eliezer ben Yaakov Kavanaki. What about prices? That's a whole different story. And then finally, we have another Kesef Mishnah, Perek Tes Halacha Tes Hilchos Reitzech Shmiras HaNefesh, where the Kesef Mishnah said if there's a machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and the Chamsi wanted to take it a step further, maybe a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva connected Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, then you would have the rule of Halacha Rabbi Akiva mechaveirav, and that goes connected. That means it's not Halacha K'mois. It's not true that every time you see Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov in Shas, you know the Halacha K'mois. You have to sit down and learn the sugya. You have to know the rest of the story. You have to make sure the Halacha is really like it. So what it means is the halacha very often follows Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, but it's not true that halacha k'maisel li'olam. Now the halacha very often follows Rabbi Yehuda as well. Rabbi Yehuda, the Gemara says, Keneged Rav Meir, his primary Baal Plukta in Shas, the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. Reb Shimon, probably his secondary Baal Plukta in Shas, the halacha is also like Rabbi Yehuda. So it's true it's not la'olam, but very often halacha k'maisel. So really, what adifus does Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov have over Rabbi Yehuda? So Rashi l'shitasa is beautiful, but if you're going to start being mefalfel with some of the other Rishonim, yesh la'ayin, why was it so pashut that it's Rav Guvrei, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov over Rabbi Yehuda? And we'll conclude that there.